I'm Jim Gordon, here to tell you about a life well led. I'm in South Richmond in the warehouse that, when you walk inside, is kind of like a history of the last 100 or so years. It's like looking at all these objects, these cars, everything you can see around me is like jumping into a magical time machine to find out who we were, what we bought, what we liked, what we idolized, because to find out who we are, you really need to know who we were. The man who gathered all this together amongst many things on a long career will join us next. Back here in the showcase warehouse here in South Richmond. I'm standing beside a 1953 Buick Skylark. They do not build them like this anymore. You know, if you bought one of these back in the day, they would actually put your name in the middle of the steering wheel. Well, our subject today is this is another one of his items he purchased over the years. To talk about our subject, we begin with a man who had very little as a young boy growing up in the Depression, but he built and created a lot, gave back more. Started businesses in a number of provinces, has made Richmond his home for about 50 years. Let's talk about our subject in today's segment. His name is Jim Ratzoy, and to learn about him, as we mentioned, we have to go back to his years as a child in the Great Depression. Jim was born in 1932 and raised on a farm in a little town called Smoky Lake, Alberta. In 1937, during the Depression, his parents lost their farm. With $100 in their pocket, they moved into town and opened a small second-hand store and lived in a small room at the back of the store. Farmers would come to town every Wednesday to sell their hogs and cattle and buy supplies. Their mode of travel back then was by horse. Alberta Poultry was looking for someone to open up an egg buying station. Jim's mom took the challenge and learned how to candle eggs. An empty bank building became the location for the new business, and they moved into the second floor as their new home. The family income improved, and his dad was able to buy a truck. The second-hand store added fur products from trappers, and when the inventory overflowed, his dad would load the furs on the truck and sell them in Edmonton. His dad also picked up cream from the farmers and took it to the creamery. While Smoky Lake was still using horses as their main mode of transportation, Edmonton was well into driving cars, so his dad helped an auctioneer buy horses from Edmonton to be shipped to Smoky Lake. Jim's dad would often pick up old autos and tractors and bring them home, and with the help of a mechanic, created a garage to rebuild and sell used autos. His dad was offered the Dodge franchise, but because of World War II, was only given 3 cars a year. In 1947, he was offered the Mercury franchise. 1 year later, GM talked his dad into switching to the Chev franchise and later added the Pontiac and Buick autos to that franchise. In 1948, Jim's mom expanded the second-hand store into a hardware and furniture store. She was a successful businesswoman ahead of her time. In 1954, Jim married Marcia, and they began their future together, welcoming 4 children over the next 15 years. In 1957, Jim's dad died, and at the age of only 25, Jim took over the dealership. In 1958, he was a founding member and director of the Chamber of Commerce, and with the help of an auctioneer, Jim was able to dissolve his dad's business by 1960 and left his mom as sole owner of the Ratsoy hardware and furniture store. In 1960, Jim moved to Edmonton and opened a used car business with his partner. In 1961, he sold his interest and invested in holiday trailers and a used car business until 1966. Later that year, Jim moved to Wetesco in Alberta to partner in a Chrysler dealership. In 1969, he sold his interest, moved back to Edmonton, and opened a used car business. In 1969, GM wooed Jim to move to Winnipeg, Manitoba. So he uprooted his family and bought the Chevrolet Oldsmobile dealership located in downtown Winnipeg. Jim said it was tough settling into the community, but one couple opened their home, the GM district manager Albert and Sheila Taylor. They stayed friends for years. Jim was honored when he was invited to serve on GM's President Council and then was awarded GM's President Award. In 1976, GM once again wooed Jim to a new challenge, this time the Pontiac Buick dealership in Richmond, British Columbia. This would be the last time Jim would uproot his family. Richmond would become home, and still is today. Well, now I'm in the office in the home of Jim Ratzoy. Jim, thanks for welcoming us today.
Thank you for coming.
You're quite welcome. Okay, I talked a bit about your automotive history and all the dealerships you have owned over the years. Let's pick up where I left off with the voiceover, and that is 1976, your first day in Richmond, the GM dealership, and you take it from there.
We had a couple of months before we were going to start a GM dealership, and it was a matter of finding location. And we approached the city for a license and so forth, and they would not grant us a license, but so it made it a little difficult. But we turned around and we ended up, the AMC dealership had a problem, and we bought the AMC dealership and ran that for about a month and a half, 2 months. And this took the, sold the inventory and so forth that we had, and then we proceeded with the GM filling that. But then we had to get another building in, and it was off number 3 road. It was in the warehouse area, and we started a service station or service parts in that area, and that gave us a complete service and sales. But sales were on number 3 road next Denny's next door. We operated out of that for some time and ran sales on number 3 road out of the AMC deal, and we're quite successful with it. It was small and so forth, but we could bring cars in. The lot had plenty of room for things, and the location at Cedar Bridge was a good parts area that people didn't mind going over there. In 1979, we found a building on Alder Bridge that was large enough for all departments together, and the truck division, we started that on number 3 road where the AMC was. What we did, we leased a building from a carpet warehouse that was closing up, and that was right on Alder Bridge, and it was great. We started the dealership in there, and we had a little flack in that, but we got a service license, but no sales license. Anyway, but that kept on going, and we ended up, I was talking to Chrysler, and we got a Chrysler franchise that we could put at number 3 road on the temporary location with that to run that, and I put my son into business as the president of that company, because with General Motors you couldn't have another franchise. But we kept going from that, and I decided to make a Lansdowne Auto family, and we had the Chrysler place for him, and we got a chance to get Hyundai was coming in. Hyundai seemed like pretty nice deal that could work pretty good. In 1984, we added the Hyundai franchise, and that was behind the AMC store where there was an Uncle John's restaurant that folded. And we converted that building and put Hyundai into there. And it was quite successful. We sold about 1,000 cars in the first year, but limited volume was the problem with that. And the profit was not a big profit, but it was, we had a lot of people looking at them, and they traded used car. There wasn't much to trade because they were all older, you can say junkers in a sense. But it was a simple little car. It was cheap, and people were pretty anxious to get them. And ran that for a while with my daughter as president of that, Judy. From there, I bought the Firestone property at Mineru Boulevard, and after extensive renovation and so forth to the thing, we opened the Pontiac Buick dealership in there, which was or not approved by the city, but we could put the service area in that, and the sales area wasn't. But in time we fixed that up, and one day I got a phone call and said, "Are you moving yet?" And I said, "No, not yet." "Well, move fast because they're going to try and block you." So we moved on the front and we put a sales area in, and away we went. We were selling cars over there as well. The Firestone building was a boom to us. It looked like it was a dilapidated place. They had let it go, and doors were hanging off and everything else, and didn't look like much. But there was more property with it than what it looked like it had, because it was built up with sand, and on the sides it went down, so it looked like a small piece of property, which it wasn't. It was a good piece of property, and it suited us well. We operated out of there. I ended up looking at the telephone place, which just was at the back of me on number 3 Road.
It's BC Tel.
BC Tel. And I felt I needed that property somehow, so I attempted to buy it. I met with the board and of BC Tel, and they gave me a proposition, said this was the price, and I said, hell, that's way too much money for it. So, but they didn't look at that. They said, you want to buy it? That's the price. If you don't, you buy. So it was goodbye. And I tried it. About the 4th time, I finally knocked my head against the wall, and I said, I need that property. I got to buy it. So I went and I paid the price. But in the meantime, they had different restrictions, and told me, well, that's fine. I'm going to take it. They're going to have to post it again to see if there's another buyer, which they did. But we got it. We went out and bought a piece of property in the industrial area off of number 5 Road, and I optioned that, and we brought the BC Tel into that, and it was a good piece of property for them. So they took that over, and they moved and were willing to sell, and the deal transpired. It was probably one of the better moves that we made in the whole thing, both the Firestone and that. But it gave us quite a bit of property.
And Jim, that dealership remained at that location until 2008, when the property was sold to developers. I want to kind of encapsulate the next busy 5-6 years for you. From the late 80s into the early 90s, you certainly were one of the leaders in the car industry in this town. 88, it's passport of Richmond with the Saab, Isuzu, a dealership. You also changed the dealership, which became Lansdowne Saturn, Saab, Isuzu. You also added the Cadillac franchise, and in 1993, looking at my notes, the Volvo property, again on Minoru, was purchased and renovated and became Lansdowne Chrysler Dodge Cars, Trucks, and Jeeps. Jim, I got to say for our viewers, all these dealerships were on basically one street, and you were the guy back then that was that had that vision of, I want to offer customers choices all on one street, and this is pre-Richmond Auto Mall.
Right. Well, it was one location. We could take anybody to any place.
Yeah, and that's, as I said, that's pre-Auto Mall.
Yep. No doubt.
Well, we're back in the showroom where the segment began, and Jim, we're going to change gears for a second, pardon the pun, but let's talk a bit about your vintage car collection, because I was reading a quote on Yelp that said, after viewing Ratzoy's collection, I had to remind myself that this was a private collection and not a museum. You originally had plans that you pitched to the city of Richmond to turn this into a museum.
Correct. I tried to work the museum or the city to buy everything that I had and turn that into a public museum, but I couldn't make it. They refused to do so.
I look around this room and I'm trying to figure out exactly what they would be losing by doing this when you offer them something wonderful. City of Richmond, gonna have to explain that one.
Well, the other thing that at the time I did, I offered to keep everything in here.
Yeah.
And I offered them to the use of the property if they put somebody to open it up to when they needed to do it.
Sure.
And that wasn't costing them nothing.
Okay, but what I should say is you've got some spectacular vintage cars here, Jim, as I mentioned off the top. But you had so many more. You had a lawn that you would have displaying some spectacular cars. We're looking at photos right now. But you actually had a big sale recently, did you not, of over 100 vintage cars?
Yes, I sold 100 vintage cars to a fellow in Beijing.
How does someone begin to package those, for lack of a better word, to send to China?
we had a little fun with it, but it was difficult for the sense of he came back. He had two partners they were going to buy, and with him, and they backed off it, and he was by himself. So he still wanted to buy them, and that's why it came down to 100. And we had to pick out what we could by price, what he could take and what he couldn't take. And I gave him a lot of good cars, but also he took a mix of cars. The only part was that the gentleman was not familiar with a lot of things, and when they shipped him over, they felt he could take it in, and they couldn't get a permit to take him in. Mm-hmm. And we got a fellow here to ship them who got all the shipping thing, got everything written up in the forms and everything we had. And we got a call from, well, I should start a little sooner than that, because Alan Edwards wrote an article, and it went all over Canada. It went to every newspaper in Canada. And cars that were there, we got a call from the government, and the government says you can't sell the Canadian-made cars, because I had some Canadian-made cars. Right. Well, I said, you know, I don't know how I believe that, because I trade U.S. side, and I trade some, I've bought some, and I've sold some. So how that sounds? So anyway, they insisted on that. So then we sold them commercially, and commercially there wasn't anything, and it went. But when the guy got the permits and everything for it, they shipped them, but he says, I can only ship them so far to the first port. And from there, you have to haul them to Beijing. So this fellow went to Beijing, and he went to a Chinese outfit that transported, and they promised him they could bring the cars in with no problem and so forth, and get all the permits that he needed and stuff. So he came back, and he wanted to switch the whole thing, and we talked him into leaving the first part with that and look at the second part, and he can take whoever he wants from the second part. So from the second port they landed at, they got him there. When he got him there, they got confiscated. Wow. And they were stuck outside, and China, the law says 49 is the top year that they can have a car coming into there. But these cars can't be used as well. Right. Because they're not meant for the transportation, and their streets are so, you could say, so polluted, and so everything else that stops it. Right. So it was a kind of an interesting thing, but he did get him into the warehouse, and then the last I know, he had was able to take out permits every 6 months and keep them. As far as I know, he has all the cars and everything, and hasn't got rid of them. Great cars here on display, Jim, but we should mention that you also refurbish and rebuild cars. You've got a classic 1936 Cord that's being repaired by your team right now. Tell us a bit about that journey. Well, we've had that car for a long time. That thing's been painted in that about 20 years ago. I bought that car at the auction for about $15,000. Right. And I drove it and everything, but it needed to be refurbished. And we redid the car, and they didn't know how to exactly do the drivetrain and so forth properly, so there was a bit of a mix-up in there, and the mechanics were not privy to any information on these cars. But the Cord is a wonderful car in lots of ways. It's the first front-wheel drive in 1929. And it was built for a few years, and then failed naturally, and and faded away. 1937 was the last year that any of those cars came through. But one day when the car's together, when we're going to get there, and we're going to get there, but I'll give you a drive and you'll enjoy it. It's totally a different automobile, but beyond this time, like it was number one.
Yeah. Jim, you've done so much in your life. You got a lot of living left to do. You're always looking for challenges. Anything you want to? What's on that bucket list you haven't done yet?
I guess a lot of things and none.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still enjoy looking at cars. I look at cars for sale every day. I enjoy the hobby, and I enjoy what I do. The time, let's face it, is consuming in a sense, and sometimes doesn't accumulate. You don't accumulate anything out of it. But there's a certain passion to it, and I don't think I'll ever quit until I die.
I think you've, what's that old line about find something you love doing and it'll keep you young? You're certainly an example of that.
It gives me something to do, it gives me something to think about. And it's different, that's all. And it's something I understand. That how do you quit? The cars have you don't have the cars. Believe me, you get mesmerized. You see a nice car and God, I gotta buy that car.
There's so much to see in this showroom. You walked me through when I was in here last week, just classic pianos and jukeboxes that cover the decades of the 20th century, phones, signs, you name it, it's here. The car thing I find interesting because when we were talking about your history earlier, that really is a thread that has gone through your whole life, isn't it? Going back to your dad picking up secondhand cars and tractors and bringing them back to your home base. And you seem to have picked that up, and although you've done a lot business-wise, this is a passion that has turned into a business.
Well, I can tell you, my dad used to take in a trade, an old car and a trade on a new car. And sometimes paid too much because my dad wasn't a good car man. If a car stopped, he walked. Yeah. It was funny, but anyway, he got these things, and then we had developed a boneyard of all the cars, and people would come and give him an offer, and no, I got more than that in it, wouldn't sell it.
Right.
So we ended up with the whole boneyard, and then we had the auction. We sold everything to auction for, and I would say maybe 2 cents on the dollar.
Yeah. You've got a great website, which is it Grandpa, what is it?
Grandpa's Old Cars.
It's a very good website. You want to see more of what we're talking about, and Jim himself, look for that. Thank you very much for having us in your home and telling us a bit about your extraordinary life. You've covered a lot of the decades and a lot of history in this country, and looking around the room, you got history from before anybody I know was alive, including yourself. This is a great room to check out. As we say, go to the website for more information. Jim, thank you so much for having us here today.
Thank you for coming. It was very nice of you to come, and I really thank you for doing it.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, sir.
Jim Ratzoy is an inspiration. He grew up in a small town in northern Alberta, took over his dad's struggling automotive business at the age of 25 and dissolved the business. Someone once said, "The door of opportunity is there for everyone, but not everyone has the courage to walk through that door." Well, Jim Ratzoy seized the opportunity and created and sold 4 businesses in Alberta, another successful business in Manitoba, before packing up his family and moving across the country to British Columbia, where he built a chain of successful dealerships in the heart of the city. His passion, well, you get this, was restoring vintage cars and trucks. It's hard to imagine this showroom that once held over 100 cars would also be the venue for 500 people dining and raising money for charities. Jim Ratzoy has touched so many lives during his journey, and as he indicated earlier, you don't have the cars have you.
Would I do it all again? You bet. If I could go back in time, having the knowledge and the experience I have today, I would do a lot of things different.